Awesome. Well, welcome to another episode of Advertising Alpha. Today we have Nigel Thomas, who's an entrepreneur that has built multiple seven-figure marketing agencies. He's worked with some of the biggest direct-to-consumer brands and has been an advisor at over 41 startups and has 57,000 followers on LinkedIn that regularly listen to his advice. After Nigel has gone through a serious battle with depression as well as suicidal thoughts, his new mission is to really inspire underdogs to take action through the power of self-belief. He is documenting his comeback from rock bottom and sharing the journey through his newsletter and podcast called David to Goliath to show others what is possible. And we're super excited to have him. Nigel, I was a follower of yours for a bit. Before I reached out to you, and I love the content you had on LinkedIn. And I think the key thing with David to Goliath is how genuine you are and how authentic you are, and you really just post exactly who you are and how you're feeling. And I think that's pretty rare, especially on LinkedIn, with everyone patting themselves on the back. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. And obviously we had the chance to meet when I was living in Austin, and hopefully we get the chance to meet up quite a few more times because you are a genuine person yourself. And I know, regardless if it's an agency, brands, whatever you do, you're going to go on and do big shit. And I'm excited and I'm going to be cheering you on all the way to the finish line, man.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So, I guess with that, got some questions for you. The first one being, I'm really kind of thinking about your experience scaling up Alpha Inbound. What did you learn from that process in terms of what are the main kind of focus areas or pillars of direct-to-consumer digital advertising?
Yeah, I think one of the things that took me way too long to learn, and I still think that so many brands just don't understand this, is advertising is basically a math problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can solve the math problem, you can beat so many competitors. Because really, if we're talking about paid advertising, at least, you're bidding in an auction system, right? So how do you win at that auction system? Well, everyone's like, do these things with content, with copywriting, and all this stuff, and landing page optimization so you can get a lower cost per acquisition. But actually, the brands that are really winning, they're spending more to acquire customers, because just like if you had an unlimited budget at an auction, you would just bid the highest bid, right? So you would win and then you would walk off with the prize. So if you've got back-end unit economics, you really understand your cash cycle, which is another thing people don't understand, you can essentially outbid all of your competitors. And then if you put obviously great storytelling, if you put great creative copywriting and content strategy on top of that, that's when you can become unstoppable. So I think one thing I'll just add to that is a lot of agencies out there, I'm sure you see it all the time, how they say to the brands that they're working with, oh, it's fine, we can just spend a limited amount of budget because you're going to make it all up with LTV. Okay, fine, that's great. But for a bootstrap startup, let's say that it takes 12 months to become profitable with your current unit economics. Well, guess what you're going to run out of? Cash. So what you need to figure out is the time it takes for that customer to become profitable. And there are options out there. For example, I think some of them. There are credit cards where you don't just have to pay back 30 days, you can pay back 60, 90 days. Mm-hmm. So if you can beat that cash cycle, you can get your customers to become profitable, spend more on the front end, outbid your competitors, but then because you have, upsells in place, you have cross promotions, you have really good retention marketing, you can become not just profitable, but also have enough to acquire the next customer and maybe 2 or 3 more customers. That's when really you can just scale on credit and then outbid all of your competition. And this requires really understanding your unit economics, your supply chain. And when obviously social media came around, what happened is because the prices are so cheap, all of these brands, they built their unit economics and supply chains on unrealistic market conditions. Mm-hmm. And now obviously the market's caught up and it's more realistic. You've got big corporations coming in, dumping massive budgets, and they care about impressions because they're huge brands. They don't care as much about all of the stuff a startup would care about. Now it's inflated all the prices, but all those people who are focusing on just gobbling up as much customers as possible and not focusing on the back-end unit economics and getting a better supply chain in place, now they've all got massive issues. And then the other thing to add to that, is a lot of those products were garbage. I'm sure you know a lot of, for example, supplement brands who just hype marketing products. And now the word has spread and they've got negative word of mouth marketing working against them. And now it's impossible to keep up with the customer acquisition that they need to hit with those unrealistic supply chains they built out. So I know we just went through a lot of that, but just kind of recapping, I think the main thing, we can talk about branding because I'm really passionate about that, and storytelling, because I think a lot of brands don't do that right in the community side. But you need to know your unit economics. You know, my dad was actually the finance director at Adidas Group. And so I knew from an early age that economics matter, and there's no way around it. And if you've got to hire someone, a fractional CFO, to understand these things, if you're working with an agency that doesn't understand that, they're not going to solve it for you. And you have to understand the game of unit economics for paid advertising.
Yep. Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. That was an incredible summary. I really liked a lot of these points that you brought here, especially to the idea on auctions. And, you know, the brands that win are the brands that are just able to spend more, not only spend more, but to spend more to acquire a new customer, right? But one thing I wanted to go to on the unit economic side of things, because I see this all over, for most of this year, I've seen people posting about this on LinkedIn and Twitter saying, like, you know, it's like this kind of noise around contribution margin or unit economics, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand what that entails for the brand to truly understand that, right? And so I talked to a fractional CFO group, and I was asking them, I was like, hey, like, what's your process for this? And how do you help brands better understand this? And they told me step one is better bookkeeping, right? And then step two is just better financial statements, right? And really truly understanding those. But the problem is a lot of these startup DC brands actually have really bad bookkeeping, and they don't actually like accurately, you know, consolidate or accurately put together and then track these financial statements. So they have no clue where to start in terms of understanding unit economics for the entire business, not just for the product specifically, right? And why I say that is because you can kind of look at the cost of a product, let's say to manufacture, to ship, but you actually, to truly understand your contribution margin and other like financial metrics for a business, you need to understand all costs of the business, right? And so I was wondering too, like in your analysis of this and the work you've done with brands, like where have you seen brands be successful, and what are they doing specifically? Like if I was a D2C brand out there listening, what are kind of the steps I should be taking in order to better understand my unit economics?
Yeah,
I think on that too, the cash conversion cycle as well, because that's another important thing too that I think brands, you know, I don't see a whole lot of sophistication in the space on this topic either.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think another thing to add in there that makes this problem like so much more muddier, and there's been so much miseducation on this, is attribution. So all of these tools, you know, we all know what they are. We don't need to name them. And there's great people that work at those companies, but they've got a bias. If you think about it, like they need to keep their customers. So they don't have a bias to help those consumer brands necessarily grow in line with their real financials. Yep. They've just got a bias to show the information in a way where that person wants to use the tool, regardless if it's true or not. Yep. And I've seen crazy stuff in the back end of brands where the attribution in these tools, not necessarily Facebook, but all these other attribution tools are saying one thing, and then we're there looking at the P&L and the cash, and it just doesn't reflect it. So it's like, regardless if, you know, Facebook's saying that, Google's saying that, the truth is the hard numbers, the cash that's in the accounts. And at the end of the day, I think having regardless of attribution, if your cash is positive and you can see that in line with the amount you're spending, like it literally, I'd focus more on, let's say you're using Shopify, for example, like the macro revenue and the sales that you're getting versus the amount you're spending macro across all the channels. I think you want to start there, and then you can get more complicated. Because you've got these brands that are like really nailing down, like, yes, I'm only getting that much from Facebook and that much from Google. But they, like you said, they don't even understand basic bookkeeping. So it's like, first of all, just understand from a macro standpoint, how much are we spending on marketing? and then what are the sales that we're getting back?
Yep.
Ideally working out that cash cycle within ideally a 30-day period, how we become profitable and then get more money to acquire the next customer. And then you can go into the attribution models. I think, first of all, understand that, because if you're spending, I don't know, 3,000, 100, if you're spending 100K a month and you're splitting it across 5 channels, does it, because of the way, let's just say like a stranger would be introduced to your product, so they might see something on TikTok and then they might obviously see something on Facebook, and then they might see something on YouTube, and then they might see a customer testimonial, then they might come back to your website. Sure, you've got all these impressions, but you don't actually know the truth of the entire customer journey unless you've literally spoken to each individual customer and you've got really good survey data, which again is not 100% accurate. So really, if you're spending 100K across 5 channels and then the sales that are coming back is positive and you can see that actually cash hitting your account, does it really matter which channel they're coming from? A lot of people would like media buyers would be here, yes, because obviously then you need to distribute back into that main channel so you know like what's hitting top of funnel, what's hitting bottom of funnel. I get that, right? That could be more sophisticated. But first of all, just understand that you're spending money and that you're getting it back in terms of sales, and kind of just leave attribution to one side, because they're spending so much time in that attribution stuff. And I think a lot of it's just inaccurate anyway.
Yeah, so that's a funny thing too, is I'm really surprised when I meet a media buyer, especially when they don't look into Shopify. When we interview media buyers, like I ask them that, I was like, what's your source of truth? Like, how do you kind of really validate the performance of your campaigns? And like, oh no, the Facebook pixel. I'm like, all right, next one.
Exactly.
Because I mean, I'm not saying we like necessarily like turn off the interview because of that, but I think if it's really important for people just to look at day over day, what you're spending on ads, and then the revenue that's being generated in Shopify. Simple as that. That's like baseline. And then as you try to understand attribution further, really understanding like basically different pieces of attribution, which is, to your point, it's like funnel-based attribution. It's cross-channel attribution. And then 2, it's the attribution, time windows, as well as like click versus view. I think the problem too I see is people have like different attribution views on different platforms, and they don't understand that they've done that. And then 2, they take zero consideration of cross-channel attribution. So it's kind of the classic thing of people, like I see this like right now on LinkedIn, where people are like, oh, if you want better ROAS, just spend more on branded search. And it's just such a simple way of looking at it, where it's like, yeah, branded search is like derivative of better advertising, typically on other channels like Meta and TikTok, right? And it's just like, that's, people searching the brand more because they saw it somewhere else. And then knowing too that like, if you scale up on branded search and cut all other channels, effectively you're just, you're going to see much worse performance in the long term, because without that more upper funnel spend and upper funnel channels, that brand search is going to start to really taper off over time, right?
But the thing is the ecosystem's bigger than a lot of media buyers understands, because I know, for example, that for some of the brands we used to work with, if we'd spend an extra 20K on Facebook, you'd have like 10K spillover on Amazon. And then that's just Amazon. Now we've got retail as well. Like, what if they're in retail stores? Like, let's say, for example, you're seeing ads and then you go into Walmart and then you do your grocery shopping, and because you've obviously got education or you've got frequency because you've seen ads or your kids recommended you a product, now you're going to buy that product. Are we thinking about that? Because that is impacting overall macro sales. And if you think about it as a customer, like, what do we do when we, check out, see a supplement on Facebook, for example? One of the first things we do, because we're used to shopping on Amazon, we'll go and check out on Amazon, because that's where we're used to buying the product. But then a lot of the media buyers and agencies that work with those companies, they don't even think about those things. And the reason why is because they're not business owners. And I think one of the best ways from an agency standpoint is to actually ask the right questions to the business owner, like how are they looking at everything across the board, and try and get in their shoes. And I think that the real thing is just seeing things from more of a macro standpoint versus micro, because the customers are doing different things to what they think the attribution tools are telling them. And they're just looking at it in such a micro, narrow-minded way when the customer ecosystem doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, to your point here too, it really depends on the size of the brand and the complexity of the brand. Because if it's a brand that's just advertising on, let's say, Meta and Google search, and they're on Shopify only, they're not in retail, like that becomes more clear with just looking at, paid advertising. But yeah, if they're on Amazon, if they're in retail, if they're doing CTV, they're doing linear TV buys, as well as like programmatic advertising, et cetera.
Yeah.
God, it's so much harder to understand that.
Yeah. And I think just in terms of some baseline metrics, I was speaking to a brand the other day that I was doing a bit of advisory work for, and they were like, yeah, Nigel, we need a $15 CPA. And it was just never going to happen. Like, I don't know where they got the idea, and their average order value is like $35, $40. It wasn't going to happen. And then I was asking about their, conversion rate. And I think that's something that a lot of brands don't think about, is they don't look at CRO because it's not a sexy thing, but actually it has huge incremental gains. And then obviously the other one, and why I strategically positioned the agency Alpha Inbound to help supplement brands, is because they have recurring revenue. So they can pay more for that customer if I can help educate them to understand. Because ultimately, and I think this is actually one thing that I want to say, which should really help a lot of brands. This is one of the best ways to think about advertising and marketing, is speak to investors of e-commerce brands to see what they value. Yeah. And what they will tell you is they value the lifetime value to customer acquisition ratio. So all things said and done, from a high level, a good healthy ratio should be 3-1. You spend 1 and you get 3 back. Ideally, if we can make that 5, we can make that 10, it's going to be more valuable. The problem is that a lot of these D2C brands, they're so short-term minded that they're just thinking about getting profit like as soon as possible. When even if you're not going to sell your company, like you want to be looking at strategically like an investor would, and then you can build your company into a scalable model. And what that really is if you can't get a subscription-based model, then you need to have a way of extending that lifetime value somehow. Otherwise, because let's be honest, man, the advertising costs aren't going to get any cheaper from here on out. That's just the cold, hard truth we need to accept. So if you're trying to do the race to the bottom and you know what happens, the brands, they chase around different agencies. And they have these unrealistic expectations, and they keep getting orders from these different agencies. And within a year, they'll jump between 5 different agencies. And they don't understand the cost opportunity that switching agencies every single time has on their business. And if someone just told them the truth that, look, your business model sucks, your unit economics aren't correct, and until you fix that, it doesn't matter what marketing agency you work with, you ain't going to fix this problem. Because even if you can get someone who's got this viral creative that can just drop the CPA for a few months, it ain't going to last. So just face the cold, hard truth. You need to look at your conversion rate. You need to look at your, recurring business model to see how you can increase that lifetime value. And then just get the unit economics where you don't have to worry about a rise in cost per acquisition of 10%, 20% every year, because you've stacked the cards in your favor and you're playing the game differently.
Yeah, that's
that switching agencies thing, man, though, is crazy. Like how much time and money brands waste switching agencies all the time.
And it's crazy
a shiny
because
object.
Well, I think one thing is, so first of all, we have a 3-month minimum if we're going to work with anybody, because it takes us about 3 months to fully start really accelerating things, like really improving things, really knowing what we're doing. And that's one thing I don't get about a lot of agencies that promise or that have like month-to-month contracts. I don't think you can do a whole lot in a month, unless we've done a lot for some clients in a month, but that was just because where they were in such a bad place that for us, it was very easy to solve some of those problems in a month. But on average, most, brands that are doing at least okay, Like in order to really start significantly improving things, it's about 3 months time, right? But the thing is you got to realize that if you're switching agencies, you're losing 3 months of learnings basically every single time. And it makes no sense to me. That onboarding time always takes much longer. It's very, that team needs to get more educated on your brand, the kind of analytics setup you might have, the business to your point, like the financial side of everything. It's actually a lot of information for that agency to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's just a huge amount of time lost and like inefficiency in that time period when they're getting onboarded that the brand is losing money doing that. So
yeah,
also too,
go for it.
I guess this last thing, and sorry, I'll let you, but for me now in the kind of, when I'm qualifying prospects, one of the questions I ask is like, what's your agency experience? Because if I hear they've worked with a lot of different agencies, that's a huge red flag for me. And typically I don't actually pursue that brand because I just know it's, they're likely going to churn us too, no matter what we do.
Exactly.
And it's just not worth it. So.
Yeah, because then, they get in, like 50 emails a day in their inbox saying, we can do these crazy things, the office things, like whatever, and then they'll just jump ship. Because the reality is the real reason that they're struggling is because probably it's something to do with their business model and supply chain, but that's a big, ugly problem that they don't want to fix. And they'd rather just blame it on the agency and switch. And again, it's actually a victim mindset, and that's the issue. But something that I noticed, and I don't know if no one speaks about this in the space, but if you think about a marketing agency, like who runs a lot of these marketing agencies, right? They're marketers. Mm-hmm. But how do you grow a business, especially an e-com brand? Yeah, sure, the marketing is like the petrol that you pour on the fire. But if the fire is like burning down the building, you're just going to burn down the building faster. Whereas you pour it on the right fire, it can explode, it can do great things like igniting that spark. And the thing is that these marketers are great at selling this big, sexy solution, but they don't actually understand what they're selling because they don't understand unit economics. They don't understand, retailers. I'll give you one example. I was actually part of a bid for one of our clients, and I went to the HQ of Walmart in Arkansas, I understood what happens on the retail side. Like a lot of these retailers can provide a lot of great things. Do you know that a lot of them don't pay you for 6 months or 12 months? And how are you going to make up that cash? Well, that means you need to be more profitable on the DTC side. Like these things that I'm speaking about here are very foreign concepts to online marketing agencies who just sit behind screens because they have no idea how businesses run in the background and the amount of finance and manufacturing things that these D2C owners have to deal with. And at the end of the day, what happens is they set those unrealistic expectations because it's what the brand owner wants to hear. They buy into it, and then they're done again. Like in 3 months down the line, like you said, they're ready to switch. But it's because I think a lot of it comes back to the people who are running these marketing agencies are marketers. They're not like operational people. They don't understand how to run big businesses.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, at that point, I was doing a pitch last week, and our pitch process is we typically just ask a lot of questions. Like we're really trying to figure out the brand, like how they've grown, unit economics, things like that. Like I don't actually do a whole lot of pitching of what we do as an agency, which is somewhat problematic as I learned from this pitch, but it's interesting because some of the feedback we got is like the brand wanted to be pitched and they wanted to kind of hear this thing. And they're like, we got on this call and they were just, you were just asking us a ton of questions. Like, what was the point of that? But for me, it's like, I really want to figure out what's going on. Like I can always kind of position our what we're doing in terms of our pitch based on some of these answers I learned. But actually at this point, I care way more about how the brand is running and how they're thinking about scaling, how they operate than I care about giving them a whole pitch. Because if I can see the brand that I know will work well, or we will be able to really drive performance for, then I'm going to go pitch them and really try to close that. But if I'm hearing the things that I'm like, these are kind of red flags, I just don't care about pitching them. I don't know if that's bad or good, but...
No, it is good. At the end of the day, we've worked with brands before where we scaled them really fast. And then because they didn't have good infrastructure in place, they sold out a product for 6 months. You know, they needed a new warehouse and they couldn't handle the scale we brought to the table. So when I was jumping on calls with people asking them like about distribution questions and manufacturing, they're kind of looking at me like really unexpected. Like, what is the marketing agency? Why is he asking me about, am I going to expand internationally when I hit this particular ceiling? Or, you know, how do you distribute? How fast do you get your product out to your customers? All this kind of stuff. But this is the stuff that really matters and scales companies. And again, it's like, you can't put lipstick on a pig. And the thing is the problem is you could do that about 10 years ago, but now you can't anymore. Yeah. And now there's a lot of brands that were doing that are in the shit, and they're just trying to find marketing agency after marketing agency. But the reality is you've got crap products and crap unit economics. And then also you've got loads of marketing agencies that scaled up really big with these like SOPs, like really basic, just like set up and leave it campaigns. And now, because what is an agency at scale? It's basically resourcing. You have to be able to resource efficiently. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to resource their agencies for their clients on what worked 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the problem is what works now requires like 5 to 10 times the amount of work, but they haven't got the margin, the resource within their business. So instead, what do? They just focus on sales and acquisition, which is what they know anyway, and they just churn and burn clients. And then obviously it gets a bad rep for all the other agencies who actually are trying to do the right thing. And that's why we're in a bit of a weird place right now.
Yeah, well, I'd say that's why we're actually scaling, because we've just taken clients from those bigger agencies that do just have very standard SOPs to, you know, it's like set up Facebook campaign, here's a checklist, and they're not thinking about any of the stuff that we think about, right? But that actually leads to my next question, which is, you know, you came in and scaled Alpha Inbound pretty significantly. You know, kind of looking back on that now, what were the main things that you've realized were the areas that were most important to focus on? Like what were the kind of key things, like key trigger points, key levers to scaling up the agency?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously from an agency side of things, we needed to get cash so we could hire better talent. So for that, we had to raise prices, and really where obviously, you know, from the agency side, so the brand knows, it's better to work with less clients but charge them more. And the only way to really do that if you're doing performance marketing is scale bigger budgets. So it was really about identifying the people. Like one of my core qualifying questions was, where is your investment coming from? Like, do you have investors? Like, what is your cash looking like? Because it's not just about if they're bootstrapped or they've got VC money. It's also if they have a big war chest, then obviously they can scale pretty dramatically. That's really, really important, because then it's worth me and my team putting in all this time, because we know it's going to back out well for us, and it's also going to back out well for you. So one thing
quickly on that, you know what I learned is a red flag when I would ask a similar type question. But what I would hear is every time someone said, as long as we're hitting this CAC or this ROAS, we can go to the moon. We can scale infinitely. I knew if I heard that, they didn't have money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I would, when they would say that, so I'll be like, okay, great. Can you spend $1 billion then? No, you can't. So how much can you spend? And then what ceilings are we going to hit and when? And like you said, they didn't actually have proper projections, because a proper company, the way they run it, and they'll get obviously money for investments, they have to do financial forecasting. So if they don't have financial forecasting in place, you know that they're not smart people, or they haven't thought about it. They're just not that level of business yet. They're just kind of shooting from the hip. And that's a real problem, because they'll need money for different things they haven't thought about yet. And they will cut marketing first. And they'll just put you out as the agency. But what I noticed is I came across this study, which was, what do the top 1% of meta advertisers, especially brands, do compared to the 99%? Like, all things equal, what is the one thing they're doing? And they test 11 times more. That's it.
Yeah.
So we needed to be able to bring the content in-house because the biggest thing, and this is for brands, but also the agencies they work with, is the feedback loop between the analytical brain and the creative brain.
Yep.
Because you can't have just one or the other. You can have the best creative person in the world, but if they're not looking at the analytics, then you're just going to be constantly testing like these delusional ideas, and you're not, because all business is really is like feedback from the marketplace. You're thinking of a great idea, and a great creative storyteller can come up with something to give you a great start, right? But once you put that idea out there into an algorithm, you need to be able to look at that data, and then you need to be able to feed that data back to the creative person so they can say, well, that worked, that didn't. Okay, now I've got an idea. Let's do more of this and less of that. Now, me saying that sounds quite simple, but when you've got 20 clients and you're spending $100 a month for each client, the amount of complexity at scale, that's why most agencies aren't winning. So the biggest thing is bringing the content in-house was one of the biggest moves forward we had, because I used loads of different, outsourced content agencies, and they all did pretty well at the start, like 1-2 brands. But as soon as we scaled past 10, they couldn't handle the scale because of that feedback loop. And you know this, one of the biggest problems that agencies will have with the brands, it's the feedback loop between, let's say, the brand's doing the content, how long it takes, like, we need this piece of content or we need this new landing page. And they've always got other priorities. It's like, well, sorry, we've got to solve this, this, and this. And it takes like 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks is literally the difference between having a viral campaign and not. And that's where your competitors are beating you. If you can shorten those feedback loop cycles, so every single day, every single week, things are getting tested in line with that data, and you've got really good creative strategic people, that was the biggest thing. And that operationally was really complex to solve. And I was there 2 years. We were starting to solve it near the end. I feel like we could have done a lot more, but I didn't see, and maybe you can enlighten me, and I talked to a lot of agencies, and I didn't see really hardly anyone who had done this really efficiently at scale.
No one has. I mean, it's a big problem for us. We're still trying to figure this out. I think we're a lot closer. But I mean, for me, this is a big opportunity I think generative AI provides. Because, and I think Meta is going to do this. They're just going to close that. It's going to be a completely closed loop. It's going to be like, delivery campaigns for, generative AI, creative, learn from it, adjust in real time. And I think that's what's going to happen eventually, because I mean, it's so challenging. That feedback loop is so difficult. It's like you launch the ads, you got to have enough spend to get some level of significance. You have to give that data back to the creative person. They typically look at it in like motion, right? You have to talk to the media buyer about it, because also too, it's like the creative in isolation. You can kind of think one thing, but you have to understand in the context of the campaign setup as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, this creative was targeting this like specific type of audience, and this was a test campaign, not our scaling campaign, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, we had all this other creative in the thing. That's why it only got this amount of spend. You know how it works. And then it's like, okay, so they understand the context, and then they can kind of infer these learnings. They make the adjustments, however long that takes. Like we have like static ads down to like 2-day turnaround. Then we got to send it to the client for approval. We have to chase them, and that might take 2 or 3 other days. But then like our turnaround time, at least for static ads, is typically a week end to end, right? Getting the insights, developing it, getting approved by the client, getting it back into the account, right? UGC videos, this still takes like 3 weeks. Because we got to get new videos shot with the content creators. And,
and you've got to get hold of the creators, and they change their mind, and then all this BS, and you've got to get the products out to them, and then the shipping delays. And these are things that brands don't understand. But then again, the agencies, like you said, set unrealistic expectations, because they sell it for one client, but when they've got 10, it's that operational complexity. They don't understand it at scale. And then it just puts them in a massive... it becomes impossible. And the reality is they probably just need to charge more money and hire more people, but they're not.
Well, that's the thing. The funny thing about it too is pricing for it, because it's actually a lot of time. It's a lot of people involved. And it's actually, because like agencies is typically just like cost of time, right? And it is way more expensive than what people think. Like, how hard is it to get an iPhone video done?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, it's actually pretty hard.
Yeah.
So
at scale. I think one thing as well for brands, if they're going to do it internally or if they're going to hire an agency, the media buy is one thing. I think that'll become more of a lost art, as you said, because Facebook will just make it, because if they can make it to a point where you literally just dump in a creative and Facebook does everything, people will spend more money, which means obviously they make more money as a company.
Yeah.
So the media buy is still important, but it's a lot less important, and it will become less important over time. But even with AI, and it is getting way better, I still think an area which a lot of people don't think about is copywriting. And I think a really good copywriter has a massive, it's a massive lever to pull, because I don't know about you, but how many times have you spoken to a creator and you've not given them a script and they've recorded a video that's been a viral creative? I remember at Alpha Inbound, we had none of those. All of the viral creators were all scripts that our copywriters wrote.
Yep. Yeah.
And that is, if you think about whether it's a static image, it's going to have copy on it. Whether it's a landing page, it's the headline, it's copywriting. Whether it's the script they're going to read off, it's copywriting. It's the input is the copy, and ideally having a creative person too, so you can kind of obviously get really good storytelling behind it. And again, that relies on the brand being able to give you a load of information about their avatar, which again, they don't collect that. So it's a big wasted opportunity. But I think having a really good copywriter, in my opinion, is a huge strategic advantage still.
100%. It's funny. I have a buddy who was he worked at an email marketing agency. He's a copywriter. He was the agency. His copy, what was the reason why the agency was a success. And it ultimately, there's some issues with the founder, CEO, and kind of blew up the agency, and it kind of fell apart. And so my buddy just started his own email marketing agency, and it's immediately gone back to being very successful and scaled it up really fast. But it's just when he would take on a client, the performance of those email campaigns would dramatically change for the better with his copy. And it was only his copy. But it was it was so obvious to me how effective he was and how good his copy was, because, every single client, and I used to work with him at this agency, every single client we would take on, it was almost night and day difference in performance once he started working on those campaigns. So and that's the thing too, is it's one of those things where everyone can write, and now with ChatGPT, everyone can go get copy and content. But to be a truly exceptional copywriter, that's actually extremely difficult. That's a 1% skill that is really hard to find.
Yeah, 10, and especially in a certain vertical, if someone's just written copy for supplement brands for 10 years, there's no way right now, today speaking, any AI can compete with that. It's not possible. And the thing is I've seen some of the agents I've been advising, they've hired for a copywriter, they'll get 100 applications, because one of the things we do for recruitment is just 10x the volume of applications. And you see half of them come through, ChatGPT can already write better than half of the people. And then there's another 30% where they're kind of using a bit of AI and, a bit of human writing. But then the top, out of those 100, 5 to 1 candidates is night and day. It's not 3 times better. It's 20 times better. Yeah. And then they hire those people, and all of a sudden the ads start going viral. And for the brands, I think they need to think about that. Testing is super important. I've already said, they test 11 times more the top 1% of advertisers. But I don't know if you saw this, because I remember looking at all of our campaigns when I was at Alpha Inbound. Pretty much it all came down to about 2 or 3 creatives over the course of a year.
Oh, yeah.
If you can just get one viral creative, that can be the difference between Xing the growth of your company. And how do you get that viral creative? We have to have an exceptional copywriter and someone creatively that understands storytelling. So if you have a creative strategist who can go out there, map out the story of the brand, find the right creators that can bring it to life, and then you have a copywriter who really writes all the scripts, the headlines, so you've got congruency across the funnel. Those two things can get a viral creative that can just scale, it can scale the shit out of accounts. And so many brands and so many agencies do not understand this. And you see it all the time. We look at Billo, for example, like the volume of crap, it's just like there's way more volume now, but it's just there's so much crap out there. And all these like templates that people are using and just giving to creators and hoping for the best and slinging crap at the wall. And it really comes back down to the fundamentals. And these A players really do make a big difference. But as we obviously kind of talked about, someone who's got 10 years in copy, like they ain't cheap. And the brand doesn't want to spend much on the agency. So then it's just, and then they're chasing for these smaller agencies and then they never get out of the cycle. So it's just like, understand, you got to pay more and you got to have exceptional people.
Yeah. Well, so to wrap this up, I still want to ask you one last question, which I think is, I'm really curious to learn more about. And so now you've launched David to Goliath. I think it's really interesting, especially in this space where there's a ton of self-doubt and then there's also a ton of isolation, like, being remote, being digital first, whatever it might be, you're not getting the same face-to-face time. And also too, when you're starting, agencies, and a lot of people are like starting these digital-based businesses, a lot of the head trash that is out there. So, I was kind of curious about what you learned from the experience with Alpha Inbound, working with a lot of DTC brands, working with a lot of people in this space. That you've decided to take the David to Goliath and really make it your main focus?
Yeah, man. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it wasn't by choice. I didn't have anyone who believed in me, and I had one person that did. And, I was an outsider, right? I was an outcast. And for anyone out there who's listening, like, if you have one person that believes in you, it literally changes your life. And then if that same person then betrays you, you question everything about yourself. And that's what I did. And that's why I went into a cycle of depression and I had to leave Alpha Inbound, because I was in a very, very unstable place and had to rebuild my life again. And, I'm not religious, but I was so desperate. I made a prayer to God and said, if I document my comeback, then just stay by my side and give me the strength to keep fighting. And I made a contract with God, man, that I'm going to keep fighting. And the one thing that I needed to do was believe in myself. And if through believing in myself, I can go on and build something big, a movement, and inspire other people to believe in themselves, other underdogs. That's why it's David to Goliath. We all know the story. That is a life worth living. And I think if we kind of cycle it back to brands, I think, we talk about there's a lot of hype marketing out there, but how many brands are making real impact? Like, when I talk about a brand, I'm talking like, why is it that people spend $300 on Nike basketball shoes? It's not because of the quality of the shoe, man. It's because Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time, wore that shoe.
Yeah.
And they represent that. So if you can give someone a brand or a community, which is what I ultimately want to do, David to Goliath, where that ends up, whether it's products or whatever, and they can put that on and say, yeah, I believe in myself, and get over that self-doubt, that will enable people to take risks, especially underdogs that need to believe in themselves. And in this world, which is full of victim mentality, they can just start betting on themselves without having to shout into the void, which doesn't get anyone anywhere anyway. And the best example I can give you is to fund this newsletter. Because even though obviously I built these agencies, they weren't my agencies, right? So I didn't make all the money. I got all the skill sets, so I needed to fund this newsletter. So what I started doing, as you know, is I started working one-to-one with all these startups, marketing agencies. And I'll be honest, man, I didn't want to do it. I just did it for the money. At least that's what I thought at the time. But what I realized, Hal, is all of these guys and girls, they needed help with self-belief. And that was the real reason they couldn't charge more. They couldn't, do LinkedIn posts. They couldn't get on podcasts. It's because they didn't believe in themselves. And there's one great example I can give you. You know who he is now, but he's called Toby Chapman. And this guy's 22 years old. And he was doing about $2,000 a month, when he was about to lose his last client. He was thinking about quitting and going back to university. The guy's motivation was on the floor. And he invested his last dollars in working with me, just as like a last chance thing. And because he did that, and he was a really good guy with a big heart, I just said to myself internally, there's no way I'm not letting this guy win now. I don't care what we've got to do. I am not going to stop until we get this guy success. And he's closing the year out. He's 10x the growth of his business.
Wow.
And yeah, he's done phenomenal things. Actually, yesterday, and the reason why this comes full circle, and actually what I didn't realize is the mission of self-belief. I was like seeing the newsletter, that's the thing. The agency thing, helping these agencies is just to get money to fund that thing. But actually, Toby and a few other people helped me realize that that was the mission. It was just the starting point of it. So I was on a call yesterday with a guy called, I'm not going to mention his name actually, but he was in a really, really bad place. Like this guy who's running an agency, and we got talking, and he's lost one of his big clients. He's a really good person and, you know, very smart. And he's got to feed his family. The guy lives in New York and he's got bills to pay. And I started sharing Toby's story to him, and it really inspired him. And the guy just completely broke down, man. Like, broke down into tears. And this is a guy who's like in his late 30s, early 40s. And I use that story of Toby to inspire this guy to believe in himself to carry on. Because he was just like, he was almost just done at this point.
Yeah.
And for me, that's like, how can I scale that? I don't know. But I know I'm putting across meaningful impact right now. So I know this mission is there. I've not quite got the pieces together. I need to know how to scale it, whether it's a brand or whatever. But inspiring these people through self-belief and stories like Toby, I think it's an incredible thing. And for anyone out there who's building a brand or a company, I think it really is about that, starting that movement. And really that guy who's like breaking down, crying on a call, like, and if you can change that one guy's life, instead of getting him to buy a hyped up supplement product, like I can change that one person's life, and I can do that one by one and slowly but surely up the spread. I think David to Goliath and whatever it becomes, it will be a bit of a slow burner. But once it gets real product market fit and we've got a community, we've got a movement, it will scale massively. And I really do believe that, because of the conversations I've had and the lives that have been changed. So I'm just getting started, but I'm really thankful, considering this time last year I was thinking about committing suicide, to be in a position now where I've obviously helped these guys out and we've been changing lives. Now I just need to figure out how I can scale it up, but I'm grateful to be on that mission, and it's worth more than money can buy, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's heavy. A lot of stuff in that. But it's I mean, it's awesome to hear that you've kind of brought this to be your next thing, especially too from the experience that you had personally, and then now knowing how you're impacting others. I think it's funny because the big thing I kind of thought when I was first going and doing this with the agency is, I was like, how hard can this be? It's like Facebook ads, you know? And then it got so tough in some spots, and the challenge is yeah, you're battling yourself a lot because you have so much self-doubt, right? And you're but then you're by yourself too.
Exactly.
You're so isolated, and you isolate yourself, right? And you work long hours, you do whatever, and so you're kind of battling yourself in isolation, and you can put you in a really bad spot mentally. And I think that's the thing is, even though at its face, people are like, how hard is this? Like, how hard is digital marketing? It's like, it's laptop money, like, all this stuff. And the reality is that's not truly the difficulty. It's the difficulty is like going and
the uncertainty.
The uncertainty of it, right? As well as you're just like self-doubt, right? And then doing that in isolation. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The opportunity of the internet is huge. Like, we're literally speaking thousands of miles away here, and that's how we developed our relationship online. Like, that's amazing, man. Like, that's just incredible. But at the same time, the reason why we're on this call together is because our ancestors banded together as tribes to get through times that we can't even comprehend the adversity that they had to go through. It wasn't one person that did that. It was a tribe of humans. And the problem is because everyone's now working from home, they're isolated and they don't have those deep connections anymore. Because ultimately, you can't replicate over a Zoom call what you can have in person. And that's like the self-belief thing is what I want to do at the start. But then the thing that actually gets you through, once you believe in yourself, once you take the risk, is having other people around you who are going through the same thing. And that's where, for me, it's like creating that movement, but it really is that community. And I think the pendulum swung so far one way in terms of like remote work, you know, being online. You've got all these people in cities, like with so many people that are so lonely, especially for guys. The pendulum will swing back. And ultimately, the last thing I'll say on it is this, is if AI replaces everything, hypothetically, it won't, but let's say it does, what's going to be left? Human relationships. And then who's going to, like, what's going to be the people who are in charge at that point is the people who own those communities of human relationships. So for me, the best future-proof thing, and especially brands should be thinking about this, is how can you actually provide that real deep essence of community? Because community just gets bandied around as a term, but it's like me and you connecting when you are like totally in the shit, and you can phone me up and have a conversation and I can get you through that. Like, being able to do that for a group of people who are going through the same thing is just, I can't think of something that's more meaningful than that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
It's like an offline community for the online entrepreneur, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, Nigel, really appreciate you joining today. It's just awesome conversation. And there's so many really important insights that came out of this, not only from the D2C brand side, but the agency perspective, as well as what you're doing with David to Goliath. So really appreciate you being here, and love a lot of these insights. Is there anything else you want to say, or any other last thoughts?
No, I'm just grateful to have met you. And like I said, I don't know exactly where you're going to go in your journey, but I know you're a risk taker. I know you've got a big heart, and I know you're helping a lot of people. And however I can be part of your journey, I'd love to be able to do it. So just want to say I appreciate Hal as a person, and you should be proud of what you've achieved so far, because not many people can do what you do, and you're an inspiration for a lot of people, including myself.
Awesome. Well, appreciate it.